She let it fall. One deliberate, unhurried movement. Her left hand, steady as a surgeon's, eased the folded note from beneath her sleeve and released it, not dropped it, released it, so that it landed without a sound at the tip of his shoe. Like she had every right in the world to be kneeling exactly where she was kneeling, doing exactly what she was doing. Like there weren't 3 armed guards whose eyes had just turned to stone. Like the white box balanced in her right hand wasn't the reason every person in that courtyard had stopped breathing. She didn't look up. She kept her gaze fixed on the small, folded square of paper now resting against the polished leather of his Oxford, and she waited. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Then he crouched down. Slowly. Unhurried. The way only a man who has never once been afraid of stillness can move. He didn't pick up the note immediately. He studied her first, the curve of her jaw, the controlled rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her dark brown fingers gripped the white box with precisely enough pressure. Not too tight. Not too loose. Like someone who understood exactly what she was holding. His voice, when it came, was barely a sound. Built low and quiet, the way expensive things always are. You have exactly 4 seconds to explain why I shouldn't have you removed from my property. She finally looked up. Because if you open that box before you read what I wrote, she said, her voice steadier than any woman on her knees in front of a loaded courtyard had any right to be, you won't be alive to remove me. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome to Mafia Moonlight Tales, and you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because the story you are about to witness is the kind that will keep you staring at your ceiling at 2 a.m. wondering how a delivery girl just outplayed a criminal empire. Drop a like if you're already hooked. Comment below, tell me, would you have dropped that note, or would you have walked away? And share this with someone who needs a story this week. Now. Let's go back to that courtyard. 7 minutes earlier, Amara Diallo had been nobody. Just a 26-year-old woman navigating a matte black motorcycle through the narrow service roads of Gangnam's most fortified residential district, a red express delivery bag cutting a bright, almost defiant line across the gray of her uniform. Third run of the day. 42,001 total in earnings. Rent due in 11 days. She had long stopped counting the gap between those 2 numbers. She was, by every visible measure, invisible. That was the thing about Amara that most people never understood until it was far too late. She had spent her entire life being underestimated, and she had spent that same life using it. Her mother had called it a gift. Her teachers had called it unsettling. Her father, Dr. Kofi Diallo, once the most decorated forensic trace analyst in the Seoul Metropolitan Police Service's Joint International Task Force, before the investigation that destroyed him, her father had simply called it the eye. Other people look at a scene, Amara. You read it. Never let anyone take that from you. He had said that to her across a visitation table, 3 years ago, his hands folded neatly in his lap like a man who had made his peace with a verdict he hadn't earned. She had not cried in front of him. She had not cried at all, not until she was outside, not until the cold Seoul air hit her face and she understood that no one was coming to fix this. That if her father's name was ever going to be cleared, the person holding the pen would have to be her. She had taken the delivery job 6 months later. The hours were brutal, the pay was thin, and the work required her to move through every layer of this city, the gleaming towers, the back alley markets, the guarded estates. She told herself it was survival. She knew, if she was honest, that she was also mapping the city the way her father had once mapped crime scenes. Quietly. Methodically. Waiting. She had not expected the waiting to end today. The package had come through the app like any other, Priority Platinum. Contact-free drop. Seo Estate, North Gangnam. The name meant nothing on the screen. It meant everything on the street. She had felt the shift the moment she turned onto the estate road, the weight of surveillance, the geometry of guards positioned not for ceremony but for rapid response. This was not a rich man's home. This was a command post wrapped in marble. She had almost turned back. And then she had looked down at the package strapped to the rear of her bike, and she had seen it. A small, red mark on the security seal. A double slash beneath a circle, pressed into the wax in a pattern so subtle that anyone without specific training would read it as a manufacturing imperfection. Amara did not read it as a manufacturing imperfection. She read it exactly as her father had taught her, in the dark of their apartment kitchen, with a forensic manual spread across the table and her 10-year-old hands tracing the diagrams while he explained, in his quiet, professor's voice, the language that criminals use when they want to send a message inside a message. It was a dead man's trigger. A pressure-sensitive chemical seal. Open the box from the outside, and the act of breaking the primary wax releases a secondary compound. Colorless. Odorless. Lethal within 90 seconds in an enclosed space. Someone had built a murder into a delivery package. And someone had routed that package, deliberately, precisely, to the home of Seo Yi-geun. His name moved through Seoul the way weather moves through a valley. You didn't always see him coming, but you felt the change in pressure before he arrived. 34 years old. Chairman of Seo Group on paper, controlling interest in 4 legitimate conglomerates. Below the paper, and everyone in the city knew what lived below the paper, he was the architect of the most disciplined criminal network South Korea had produced in a generation. Not the loudest. Not the most theatrical. Simply the most effective. The kind of men whose enemies didn't make public declarations. They made quiet exits. He stood now in the stone courtyard of his estate, dressed in a charcoal suit cut so precisely it looked like architecture, a luxury watch catching the afternoon light on his left wrist. The neck tattoo, a single line of Hanja that his most trusted people recognized as a passage about wolves and patience, disappeared beneath his collar. His face was the kind of face that gave nothing away, not because it was empty, but because it had been trained, over many years and many rooms, to reveal only what he chose. He had been on his way to a meeting when the motorcycle pulled through the outer gate. He had stayed when his head of security murmured that the delivery rider had not moved from beside her bike for 45 seconds after parking. Just stood there. Looking at the package. Thinking. In Yi-geun's world, a person who thought before approaching him was either very smart or very dangerous. He had found, in his experience, that the most interesting people were usually both. He had walked out into the courtyard himself to see which one she was. And now she was kneeling on the cold stone in front of him, her red delivery bag a splash of color against the gray, her hand steady on a box she clearly had no intention of letting him touch, and a folded piece of paper sitting against his shoe with the calm authority of a document that had already decided the outcome of this conversation. He picked it up. Unfolded it once. Read 4 words. His expression did not change. But his right hand, the one closest to the guard at his flank, rose, 1 centimeter, 2, in the small, precise signal that meant stand down. He looked at her again. This time with something that had not been in his eyes 30 seconds before. Open the box, he said, and his voice was still low, still unhurried, but it was aimed now at the guard to his left. But if I die, he continued, and without warning he crouched down, closing the distance between his face and hers until she could see the exact shade of his eyes, until there was nothing between them but cold air and a question neither of them had spoken aloud yet. You go first. Amara held his gaze. She did not flinch. The note, now open in his hand, read 7 words in her clean, compressed handwriting. The ink is wet. The seal kills you. The guard reached for the box. The courtyard held its breath. And Seo Yi-geun, the most feared man in a city built on silence, had not looked away from the delivery girl once. Amara had grown up in an apartment where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors argue in 3 languages and the ceiling leaked in 2 places every time it rained. The kind of building where the elevator hadn't worked since 2009 and nobody had filed a complaint because filing complaints required a belief that someone was listening. 4th floor, Unit 4C, Mapogu. The address her father had written in the front cover of every textbook he ever bought her, in his small, careful handwriting, as though the act of naming where they lived made it more permanent. More dignified. She had loved that apartment fiercely and without apology. Her father had made it easy to love. Dr. Kofi Diallo had a way of filling whatever space he occupied, not with noise, but with attention. He was the kind of man who noticed things. The kind who would pause on the walk to the subway to point out a crack in the pavement and explain, without condescension, that the pattern of fracture told you the direction the ground had shifted. Who would stand in a grocery store and read the behavior of the other shoppers the way most people read menus. Who had once told a neighbor, very calmly, that her gas line had a slow leak, not because he smelled it, but because her houseplants along the kitchen wall were tilting away from the window in a pattern inconsistent with light seeking. He had been right. He was almost always right. It was the thing that eventually destroyed him. But before that, before the investigation and the tribunal and the verdict that swallowed everything, there had been the kitchen table. There had been the Saturday mornings when Amara sat across from her father with a forensic casebook between them and he walked her through the methodology of seeing. Not looking. Seeing. The difference, he explained once, while she was 9 years old and eating rice, was the difference between a photograph and a diagnosis. Anyone can record what's in front of them, he told her. That's just memory. Seeing is asking why something is where it is. Why it looks the way it looks. What it means that it's there at all. She had absorbed it the way children absorb everything important, not through effort, but through proximity. Through years of watching him move through the world with that particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are always, quietly, reading the room. It had made her strange to other children. Too observant. Too quiet at the wrong moments, and too certain at others. She had learned early to hide how much she noticed. To perform a version of herself that was slightly less unsettling to be around. The slum taught her the rest. Living in Mapogu meant learning to read people the way her father read evidence. It meant knowing which landlord would ignore a maintenance request and which one would use it as a reason to visit. It meant clocking the difference between a stranger who was lost and a stranger who was watching. It meant understanding that in environments where the official systems have already failed you, your survival depends on the quality of your own observation. On catching the thing before it becomes the thing. She had been doing it so long it had stopped feeling like skill. It felt like breathing. Background noise. The constant, low-level processing of every room she entered, every face she passed, every object that sat slightly wrong in its environment. She had never imagined it would bring her to a stone courtyard in North Gangnam, kneeling in front of the most dangerous men in the city. She had never imagined the thing that had made her father's life fall apart would be the same thing that saved hers. But that was the nature of a gift like this. It didn't ask permission. It didn't wait for a convenient moment. It simply saw, and then it acted. The box had not killed him. That fact alone had rearranged the entire geography of the courtyard. The guard who opened it was alive, shaking, confused, staring at a white interior lined with foam padding and what appeared to be a standard corporate document folder, because Yi-geun had ordered him to cut the seal from the side, not the front, exactly as the note instructed. The chemical compound, when his security team later isolated it, was embedded in a pressure strip along the primary wax. Precise. Sophisticated. The kind of thing that didn't come from a catalog. The kind of thing that required someone with very specific knowledge and very specific resources. Yi-geun had stood up, smoothed the front of his jacket, and looked at Amara for a long moment. Then he had said, simply, "Come inside." It was not an invitation. It was the kind of sentence that had only one correct response, and everyone in that courtyard understood it. 2 guards fell into position behind her. 1 walked ahead. Amara had slung her delivery bag over her shoulder, risen from the cold stone with as much composure as a woman in knee-length uniform trousers could manage, and walked through the doors of the Seo estate like she had somewhere to be. Inside was exactly what she had expected and nothing like she was prepared for. The entrance hall was the size of her entire floor in Mapogu. Pale stone floors. High ceilings with the kind of architectural restraint that costs more than decoration ever could. Everything chosen not to impress but to intimidate through understatement, the message being that the men who lived here had nothing left to prove. A wide staircase curved upward to a mezzanine level where 2 more guards stood with the careful blankness of men who had been professionally trained to look like furniture. She catalogued it all in the 11 seconds it took to cross the hall. Yi-geun led her into a side room, not an office, not a sitting room, something in between. A long table. A wall of monitors displaying camera feeds. A second man already standing in the corner, compact and watchful, who did not introduce himself and whom Yi-geun did not introduce. Amara filed that away. "Sit," Yi-geun said, though he remained standing himself, jacket still buttoned, hands loose at his sides. She sat. "You identified a contact poison on a security-sealed package in under 3 minutes of handling it," he said. It wasn't a question, but it had the structure of one. "Walk me through it." So she did. Calmly. Precisely. She explained the mark, its origin in forensic counter-surveillance methodology, where she had learned it and why it worked, and what the specific compound combination suggested about the sender's background. She spoke the way her father had always spoken, without performance, without filler, and she watched Yi-geun's expression do the thing she had already noticed it doing in the courtyard, not softening, but sharpening. Focusing. The way a lens adjusts to a subject it has decided is worth the effort. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then the guard nearest the door, tall, senior, the kind of man whose resentment sat just barely below the surface of his professionalism, made a sound that wasn't quite a scoff. Wasn't quite a laugh. Landed precisely in the space between them. She got lucky, he said, in Korean, presumably assuming she wouldn't follow it. Amara turned to look at him. The second camera on your east perimeter, she said, in clean, unhurried Korean, has been rotated 4 degrees off its original mounting. It's been that way long enough for the bracket rust to set. Whoever adjusted it knows your patrol rotation. The guard said nothing. Yi-geun looked at her the way, she imagined, people rarely expected to be looked at in this building, like she had just earned something. You start tomorrow, he said. She had not expected to sleep. She had slept 4 hours, which for Amara was close enough to a full night. The room they gave her was on the 2nd floor, east wing, small by the estate's standards, which meant it was larger than her entire apartment in Mapogu. She had set her delivery bag by the door out of habit, then moved it to the foot of the bed, then left it there and told herself to stop treating this like a place she was about to run from. She wasn't sure she believed it. But she kept the bag where it was. By 6 the next morning she was already working. Yi-geun had given her access to the estate's internal security archive, camera logs, entry records, incident reports filed over the past 18 months, with the specific instruction to find what his team had missed. It was, she understood, also a test. The kind that doesn't announce itself as one. She settled into the monitor room with a notepad and the particular quality of focus that had always made the people around her slightly uneasy, and she began to read. The archive was thorough in the way that institutions are thorough when they want to appear accountable without actually being transparent. Everything logged. Everything time-stamped. And yet, in the gaps between the entries, the irregular intervals, the incident reports that closed too cleanly, the camera outages that lasted just slightly longer than a technical fault required, she could feel the shape of something moving underneath. Something that had been careful. Something that had been here a long time. She was 3 hours in when she found the secondary filing cabinet. It was pushed against the far wall behind a rack of decommissioned equipment, the kind of placement that suggested it had been relocated rather than forgotten. The lock was standard. She wasn't proud of how quickly she opened it. Her father had taught her that too, on a slow Sunday afternoon, with a paperclip and the explanation that a forensic analyst who couldn't access a locked container was only half an analyst. Inside were physical files. Older. Paper records from before the estate had digitized its documentation, bundled in labeled folders that had been handled enough times to soften at the edges. She moved through them methodically, contractor records, correspondence, property assessments, until her fingers found a folder with no label. Thinner than the rest. Tucked flat against the back panel as though someone had pressed it there deliberately, in a hurry, with the intention of returning. She opened it. A single sheet of paper. Folded twice. Her name written on the outside in handwriting she would have recognized in complete darkness. Her father's. She sat down on the floor of the monitor room without deciding to. The sheet unfolded in her hands with the fragility of something that had been waiting a long time to be read. Amara. If this reaches you, then the path led where I believed it would. I am sorry for that. I am sorrier that I could not walk it with you. The case they built against me did not begin with me. It began here. With this estate. With a transaction I was asked to bury in 2019 and refused. The man who asked me is not who Yi-geun believes him to be. He is closer than that. He has always been closer than that. Do not trust the archive. Trust what is missing from it. I love you more than I ever found the right words for. She read it twice. Then a third time. Then she folded it precisely along its original creases and held it against her chest with both hands, her eyes on the middle distance, her breathing slow and deliberate in the way she had taught herself when the world required her to feel everything and show nothing. Her father had known. He had known, and he had left her a trail, and the trail had brought her here. She stood up. Picked up her notepad. Walked back to the monitors. She had work to do. Yi-geun ate alone. That was the first thing she noticed when the housekeeper appeared at the monitor room door at 7:30 that evening and informed Amara, with the careful neutrality of someone delivering a message they hadn't written, that she was expected at dinner. The dining room was smaller than she had anticipated. Not the long, formal table she had imagined when she first walked through the estate's entrance hall, but a side room off the kitchen corridor, intimate by accident or by design, she couldn't yet tell. A round table. 2 settings. A window that looked out onto the garden where the security lights had just begun to activate in the early dark, casting long geometric shadows across the stone paths below. Yi-geun was already seated when she arrived. Jacket off for the first time since she had met him. Shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm, the edge of a second tattoo visible just below his left wrist, a small, precise mark she didn't yet know the meaning of. He looked, without the armor of the suit jacket, like a man who was tired in a way that sleep didn't reach. She recognized that kind of tired. She had been wearing it for 3 years. They ate in silence for a while, which did not feel uncomfortable so much as established, like a rule neither of them had written but both had agreed to. The food was simple relative to the estate. Understated. She noted that too. It was Yi-geun who spoke first. "Your father was Kofi Diallo," he said. Not a question. He had clearly already known, and had simply decided now was the time to say it aloud. She set down her chopsticks. "Yes. I knew of his case," Yi-geun said, his voice carrying the same low, measured quality it always did, as though every sentence had been considered before it was released. The evidence against him was complete. Too complete. She looked at him directly. "You noticed that?" "I notice most things," he said. "I simply didn't have a reason to look further at the time." A pause. "I have one now." The garden lights shifted outside the window. Somewhere below, a patrol completed its rotation and started again. Amara thought about her father's letter, still folded in the inner pocket of her jacket, pressed flat against her ribs. "Who did you lose?" she asked. The question landed quietly. She hadn't planned it, it had arrived from the same instinct that had made her read the courtyard, read the archive, read the gap between what Yi-geun presented to the world and what sat behind his eyes at a dinner table when he believed the performance was temporarily unnecessary. He was still for a moment. Then, with the precision of a man choosing exactly how much of the truth to give, "My father built this organization from nothing. He trusted one person completely, his legal counsel, his strategist, the men who structured every legitimate holding we have. In 2019, that man advised him to sign a transfer document. My father signed it." He paused. "He died 6 months later. The transfer had moved 40% of our holdings into a shadow account my father didn't recognize. I've been tracing it since." Amara's hand was very still against the table. A transaction. A man her father had refused to bury. The same year. The same thread. She reached into her jacket and placed the folded letter on the table between them without a word. She watched him read it. She watched the moment, precise and unmistakable, when the shape of what they were both facing became visible to him the way it had become visible to her on the floor of the monitor room. He looked up. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "The same man," she said finally. Yi-geun's jaw tightened once. Then settled. "The same man," he confirmed. Outside, the patrol lights swept the garden in their steady, indifferent arc inside. Something shifted between the two of them, not warmth exactly, but recognition. The particular gravity of two people who have been fighting the same war from opposite sides of the same wall, and have finally, after a very long time, found the door. The assignment came through Yi-geun's head of operations at 9 the following morning, a man named Beck who had the build of someone who had spent decades making problems disappear in the eyes of someone who resented that a delivery girl now sat 2 doors down from the monitor room. He delivered the briefing with the clipped efficiency of a person performing cooperation without offering it. A package. A recipient address in Yongsan. Diplomatic-grade seal. Time-sensitive. "The boss wants to see how you move in the field," Beck said, sliding the assignment sheet across the table without looking at her. "Consider it an evaluation." Amara looked at the sheet. Then at Beck. Then back at the sheet. She considered it several things, none of which she said aloud. She took the package. They had returned her motorcycle and given her a fresh uniform, same red express delivery bag, newly issued, already logged in the estate's dispatch system. She noticed, as she loaded the package into the bag, that the new bag was slightly heavier than her old one before anything was placed inside it. She filed that away without reacting. Zipped it closed. Mounted the bike. The route to Yongsan was 40 minutes in morning traffic. She took it at pace, moving through the city with the practiced fluency of someone who had spent months learning its rhythms, which intersections backed up at which hours, which service roads cut cleanly through the grid, where the cameras clustered and where they thinned. She had learned this city the way her father had learned crime scenes. From the ground. On foot and on wheels, and in the margins where the official map and the real one diverge. She was 20 minutes out when she felt it. Not heard. Felt. A faint, intermittent vibration from within the lining of the bag itself, too rhythmic for road noise, too deliberate for mechanical interference. She didn't stop. Didn't alter her speed or her route. She simply noted it the way she noted everything, with the part of her mind that ran perpetually underneath the surface of whatever else she was doing, cataloging, assessing, refusing to be surprised. Someone had put something in the bag before she received it. She completed the delivery. Handed over the package with a smile that gave nothing away. Received the signature. Mounted the bike. And then, rather than returning directly to the estate, she pulled into the covered car park of a shopping complex in Mapo and sat for a moment with the engine off and the red bag in her lap. She found it in the false bottom. Taped flat against the interior seam with the kind of adhesive that doesn't leave a residue, the kind used by people who know that evidence has a way of surviving its intended context. A small device. Matte black. No larger than a thumb drive. She recognized the casing from her father's old technical manuals. A pressure-triggered signal transmitter. The kind used to confirm proximity to a target before detonation of a secondary device elsewhere. She was not the delivery girl on this run. She was the signal. She sat very still for a long moment. Outside the car park, Seoul continued its morning without her, taxis, pedestrians, the ordinary beautiful indifference of a city that does not pause for the people quietly unraveling inside it. She thought about Beck's eyes when he handed her the assignment sheet. The way they hadn't quite landed on her face. The specific quality of a man watching something he has already decided the outcome of. She photographed the device from 4 angles. Replaced it exactly as she had found it. Sealed the bag. And then she called Yi-geun's direct line, the number he had given her at dinner, without explanation, in the manner of someone who does not explain things they consider obvious. He answered on the second ring. "I need you to know," she said, her voice steady as stone, "that someone just used me to run a signal route. And I need you to know it before I walk back through your gates, so that whatever happens next, you heard it from me first." The line was silent for 3 full seconds. "Come back," Yi-geun said. She already was. The room they put her in had no cameras. She noticed that immediately, the clean corners, the absence of the small red indicator lights she had mapped on every ceiling in the estate over the past 2 days. Either this room predated the surveillance system, or it had been deliberately excluded from it. Neither explanation was comforting. Both told her something useful. The table was bare. 2 chairs. A single overhead light with the quality of illumination designed not for comfort but for clarity, the kind that flattens shadow and leaves a person nowhere to arrange their expression without it being visible. She sat in the chair facing the door, folded her hands on the table, and waited. They made her wait 20 minutes. That was deliberate too. When the door opened it was Yi-geun, Beck, and the senior guard from the courtyard, the one whose jaw she had watched tighten the first morning when she identified the misaligned camera. 3 men. Arranged not casually but with the geometry of an interrogation. Yi-geun directly across from her. Beck to the left. The guard at the door. She read the room in the 4 seconds it took them to settle, and then she looked at Yi-geun and spoke first. "The device was in the bag before I received it," she said. "Not the package. The bag. The bag that was issued to me this morning from Estate Supply, logged under Beck's authorization at 7:43. 40 minutes before the briefing." Beck's expression didn't move. Which was, she had learned, different from it being still. She could have planted it herself, he said, to Yi-geun rather than to her. The grammar of a man who had already decided she wasn't worth addressing directly. "We have no footage of the car park." Her word against the evidence in the bag. "You're right," Amara said evenly. "You don't have footage of the car park. You also don't have footage of supply storage between midnight and 6 this morning. I checked the archive gaps before I left. That particular blind spot has appeared in the camera log 4 times in the past 3 months, always the night before an internal equipment issue was reported. She paused. I have the timestamps in my notepad, if you'd like to see them. I left it on the monitor room table because I came through your gates with nothing in my hands and I wanted that to be the first thing you all noticed. The room was quiet. She kept her eyes on Yi-geun. Not performing composure, actually composed, in the specific way that arrives when a person has already accepted the worst possible outcome and chosen their conduct anyway. Her father had sat across an accusation table with that same quality. She had watched him do it and understood it, even then, as a form of dignity that no verdict could revoke. The signal device confirms a secondary target, she continued. I was the trigger, not the destination. Which means the destination is somewhere inside this estate. Something was meant to happen here while I was in Yongsan. Something that needed me out of the building and traceable, a clean scapegoat with a device in her bag and no alibi. She let that settle. Whoever built this scenario needed you to doubt me before I could finish reading the archive. Which tells you I'm close to something they cannot afford to have found. Yi-geun had not moved. Had not looked away from her once. Beck shifted his weight slightly to his left. It was a small movement. The kind a person makes when the ground beneath an argument begins to feel less certain than it did a moment ago. She had seen her father describe that exact tells in his casebook notes, the body's involuntary acknowledgement of a logic it cannot immediately dismantle. She had learned, a long time ago, that the truth does not need to be loud. It simply needs to be precise. Yi-geun looked at Beck. Then at the guard by the door. Then back at Amara. Show me the timestamps, he said. The timestamps did what logic always does when it is precise enough, they made the room smaller. Yi-geun had reviewed them in silence, his expression giving nothing away, but his stillness carrying a different quality than usual. Less controlled. More concentrated. The kind of stillness that precedes a decision rather than following one. Beck had stood through the entire review without speaking, which told Amara more than anything he might have said. An innocent man argues. A careful man waits to see which way the current moves. The meeting dissolved without resolution, which was itself a resolution of a kind. No verdict. No apology. Yi-geun had taken her notepad, dismissed the room, and told her to return to the archive. She had gone. She had worked through the evening and into the night, pulling at threads in the camera log with the focused patience of someone who understands that the most important thing in an investigation is rarely the thing that looks like the most important thing. It was past midnight when she found the pattern. Not in the footage itself but in the metadata, the file sizes of the recorded segments. Digital compression creates a consistent file weight when nothing in a camera's field of view is moving. When something moves, the file grows. When a file in a period logged as inactive shows anomalous weight, it means the camera recorded motion that was subsequently edited from the visible footage. It was a sophisticated manipulation. It was not, however, sophisticated enough to erase its own arithmetic. The anomalies clustered around one location. The East Corridor. Secondary entrance. 3 a.m., across 7 separate dates. And in every instance, the access log for that corridor showed a single cleared entry. The same badge number each time. She cross-referenced it against the estate's personnel file with the steadiness of someone who has already prepared themselves for the answer to be worse than the question. Badge 004. Issued to the senior guard. The one from the courtyard. The one who had stood at the door during her interrogation and said nothing, which she now understood was not the silence of a professional but the silence of a man managing something enormous happening inside him. She brought it to Yi-geun at 12:47 in the morning. He read the report standing in the doorway of his study, still dressed, which told her he hadn't slept either. When he finished, he looked up at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before, not anger, which she had expected, but something older than anger. Something that arrives when a betrayal confirms a suspicion a person had been hoping, very quietly, was wrong. Jang, he said. Just the name. Quietly, the way you say something you've been carrying for a while and are finally setting down. The guard's name was Jang Hoon-sik. 12 years in Yi-geun's service. Present at the courtyard on the day of the delivery. Present at the interrogation. Present, she now understood, at every critical juncture where his position gave him the precise visibility needed to monitor, to adjust, to ensure that the trap being built around Amara was constructed with enough accuracy to hold. He had not been Yi-geun's eyes in those rooms. He had been someone else's. Yi-geun made 2 calls. Short, quiet, unhurried. The kind of calls that don't require many words because the people receiving them have been waiting for exactly this instruction and know precisely what it means. Amara stood by the window and looked out at the garden below while he made them, giving him the privacy of the moment without leaving the room. When he finished, the silence between them was different from the silence at dinner. Heavier. Lit underneath by the particular tension of a situation that has just moved from the investigative phase to the irreversible one. "He'll run," Amara said. "He won't get far," Yi-geun replied. "That's not what worries me," she said, turning from the window. "What worries me is who he calls before he does." Yi-geun looked at her. And for the first time since she had knelt on the cold stone of his courtyard with a folded note at his feet, she saw something move across his face that was not calculation, not assessment, not the careful management of a man who has learned to trust no one. It looked, briefly and unmistakably, like fear. Not for himself. For her. They had 2 hours before Jang would realize his access had been quietly revoked. Yi-geun understood, as Amara did, that the window between a man knowing he has been found and a man deciding what to do about it is the most dangerous interval in any operation. Too much time and he disappears. Too little and he panics in ways that are unpredictable and therefore uncontrollable. 2 hours was enough. Enough to build something convincing. Enough to make him feel, for just long enough, that the door was still open. The plan was hers. Yi-geun listened to it without interrupting, which she had come to understand was his form of agreement. She would construct a dummy package, estate sealed, diplomatically logged, routed through the internal dispatch system under a classification high enough to guarantee that anyone monitoring the estate's communication channels would notice it. The package would be logged as containing the archive documentation she had been compiling. The real files she moved to a secondary location known only to Yi-geun. The dummy would sit in the dispatch room on the ground floor, its collection window set for 1 a.m., the hour the camera logs showed Jang had used the East Corridor 7 times before. A time he trusted. A pattern he didn't know she had found. The dispatch room had 2 entrances. Yi-geun's people would cover the external one. Amara would be inside. "You're not trained for this," Yi-geun said. Not a protest, a fact, offered in the tone of a man who wanted it acknowledged before proceeding. "I'm not trained for most of what I've done this week," she replied. He looked at her for a moment. Then he gave a short, precise nod and went to make the arrangements. She built the package at the monitor room table with the care of someone who has been faking the real thing long enough to understand that the convincing detail is never the large one. The seal. The weight. The way the corner labels were applied with the slight asymmetry of a tired logistics worker rather than the precision of someone trying to impress. She had been that tired logistics worker for 6 months. She knew exactly what it looked like. By 12:30, the package was in the dispatch room and Amara was in the narrow equipment alcove behind the shelving unit on the north wall, the kind of space that exists in every large building and is noticed by no one because it is too inconvenient to be useful. She had been there 20 minutes. The room smelled of cardboard and industrial cleaning fluid. The lights were off. She was still. She heard him at 12:54. Not the door, he had a key, and he used it with the practiced quietness of someone who had performed this movement many times. What she heard was the change in air pressure as the east entrance opened, and then the careful, deliberate absence of sound that belongs to a person moving through a familiar dark. A thin beam of torchlight crossed the shelving. Found the package. Held on it. She heard him lift it. Heard the specific sound of a seal being assessed by fingers that knew what they were looking for. Heard, very faintly, the click of a communication device activating. "It's here," Jang said. Low. Certain. The voice of a man reporting in rather than deciding. "I have it." 30 seconds. Amara stepped out of the alcove and turned on the lights. Jang spun. The package dropped. His hand moved toward his jacket. "The room is surrounded," she said, her voice carrying the same quality it had across the interrogation table. No performance, no anger, just the clean authority of someone who has already finished the calculation. And that, she added, nodding at the package now on the floor between them, is empty. The door behind him opened. Yi-geun stepped through it, unhurried, jacket buttoned, with the expression of a man arriving at an ending he had been moving toward for a very long time. Jang looked between them once. Then his shoulders dropped, a millimeter, no more, in the involuntary language of a man whose options have just become one. Jang talked for 40 minutes. Not because he was broken, men like Jang didn't break easily, and Amara had the sense that he had rehearsed some version of this conversation in the back of his mind for years, the way people who carry secrets eventually begin to prepare for the weight of them becoming too much. He talked because the mathematics had shifted irrevocably and he was, above everything else, a man who understood when a position was no longer defensible. The name he gave them was Park Sung-jin. Senior legal counsel to the Seo organization for 14 years. Architect of its legitimate holdings. The man who had advised Yi-geun's father to sign the 2019 transfer document. The man who had, in the same year, approached Dr. Kofi Diallo with a request to bury a forensic trace linking that transfer to a series of fabricated asset movements, and when Diallo refused, had constructed the evidence that destroyed him with the same methodical patience he applied to everything else. Park had spent years embedding himself deeply enough to be indispensable and carefully enough to be invisible. He had moved slowly because he had always understood that the most durable kind of power is the kind that nobody watches being built. He had not anticipated the delivery girl. Yi-geun listened to all of it without speaking. When Jang finished, Yi-geun looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man closing an account rather than settling a score, something colder than anger and more final than disappointment. He said 3 sentences. Quietly. With the absolute authority of someone who has never needed volume to be believed. Jang was escorted from the estate before 2 a.m. No violence. No theater. Simply removed, the way you remove something that has been in the wrong place for too long. Amara understood this was its own form of severity. In Yi-geun's world, exile was not mercy. It was erasure. Park Sung-jin was taken into custody by the Seoul Metropolitan Police at 6:45 the following morning, on the basis of a forensic audit compiled from the archived documentation, Amara's timestamp evidence, and the signal device she had photographed in 4 angles in a Mapo car park 2 days prior. The arrest was quiet. It made the afternoon news cycle in 3 sentences. The investigation that followed it would take months and reach considerably further, into city governance, into judicial appointments, into the kind of institutional architecture that requires years and a very specific kind of patience to build. The exoneration order for Dr. Kofi Diallo was processed 11 days later. Amara was alone in the monitor room when Yi-geun brought her the document. She read it once, carefully, the way her father had taught her to read anything important. Then she set it flat on the table in front of her and placed both palms on it and looked at the wall for a long time without speaking. Yi-geun stood in the doorway and did not fill the silence, which was the most considerate thing he had done since she met him. When she turned around, her eyes were dry. She had cried the night before, alone, which was the only way she knew how. "I need to go see him," she said. "The car is ready," Yi-geun replied. "Take as long as you need." She went. She sat across the visitation table from her father for 2 hours, and for the first time in 3 years she watched his hands unfold, slowly, like something unclenching after a very long tension, and rest open on the table between them. When she returned to the estate that evening, Yi-geun was waiting in the side room where they had first had dinner. Same table. 2 settings. Something simple. He waited until she had sat down before he spoke. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as security. Not as a consultant." He paused, with the particular precision of a man choosing words he means to be permanent. "As a partner. Someone with a seat at every table where decisions are made." Amara looked at him for a moment. She thought about her father's kitchen table. The forensic manuals. The careful voice explaining the difference between looking and seeing. She thought about the cold stone courtyard and the folded note and the 4 seconds in which she had decided, without fully understanding why, that some things are worth the risk of kneeling in front of a loaded room. "I have conditions," she said. Yi-geun almost smiled. It was brief and controlled and entirely genuine. "I expected nothing less," he said. 3 months after the night in the dispatch room, Amara passed a delivery rider on the street outside the Seo estate. She was coming back from a meeting, her third that week, the kind conducted in rooms with no windows and very precise language, where the decisions made had consequences that rippled outward in ways the city would feel without ever knowing the origin. She was dressed differently now. The red express delivery bag was gone. But she recognized the rider immediately, not from his face but from the way he moved, the practiced efficiency of someone navigating a city that has never once organized itself around his convenience, the particular alertness of a person whose survival depends on reading every environment he enters within seconds of entering it. She watched him lock his bike, check the package, assess the entrance, and move. Invisible to the three people who walked past him in the same moment. Invisible to the doorman who accepted the delivery without looking up. Invisible to the building itself, which absorbed him and released him without record. She knew exactly what he had seen on that street in the 30 seconds it took him to park and enter. She knew because she had been him. Because she understood that invisibility, when it is imposed on you rather than chosen, becomes a form of education that no institution teaches and no status can replicate. The people who move through the world unnoticed, the riders, the cleaners, the drivers, the night shift workers who pass through the architecture of power before its occupants arrive in the morning, they accumulate a knowledge that is entirely different from the knowledge of the people they serve. It is not theoretical. It is not filtered through the comfortable assumption that the world is basically ordered and fair. It is the knowledge of the room before the performance begins. The knowledge of what people do when they believe no one of consequence is watching. Her father had understood this. It was why, she realized now, his forensic work had been so precise, not only because of his training, but because he had spent his life being the kind of person that powerful men looked past. He had stood in rooms where transactions were made and instructions exchanged and quiet corruptions ratified, and he had seen it all, because not one of the men in those rooms had thought to consider what the analyst in the corner might be filing away. His invisibility had been their blind spot. And when he refused to let it be weaponized, they had destroyed him for it. The city had not protected him. The institutions had not protected him. The systems built, ostensibly, for exactly that purpose had been turned against him by the same hands that had built the appearance of integrity over the substance of its opposite. What had protected him, in the end, was a daughter who had inherited his eye. Who had carried his methodology through 6 months of delivery routes and 4 flights of stairs in a building with a broken elevator and a ceiling that leaked in 2 places, and had never once stopped seeing. Who had knelt on cold stone in front of a loaded courtyard and understood that integrity is not a luxury available only to people with the status to afford its consequences. It is the only currency that cannot be fabricated. The only mark that does not wash off in an investigation. She had not saved Yi-geun because she was brave. She had saved him because she was paying attention. Because she had been trained, by poverty and love and a father's quiet patience, to read what others walked past. The rider reappeared from the building, mounted his bike, checked his next address, and moved into the traffic without looking back. Amara watched him go. Then she turned and walked back through the gates of the estate, her conditions met, her father's name restored, her seat at the table earned in the only way that seats worth having ever are. Not by being given access to the room, but by already knowing what was in it.